On This Week in Enterprise Tech, Mo is talking about warshipping and a hack in a box, plus Curtis goes deep into what's displayed at the DEF CON ICS Village. Plus, we also have a great guest. Mo, Curtis, and I talk with Matt Talbot, CEO of GoSpotCheck, about digital transformations and finding solutions for your organization to make them more productive. It's Wyatt on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 355, recorded August 16th, 2019. Hack in a Box. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by LastPass, the #1 most preferred password manager. Just remember your master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Visit lastpass.com/twit to learn more. And by NetScout. Meeting the digital demands of today starts with a bold new IT strategy. NetScout is delivering a new perspective, visibility without borders. To guide your digital success and data transformation, get seamless visibility and monitoring for performance and security. See how at netscout.com. Welcome to Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that's dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world's connected. I'm your host, Louis Moreski, your guide through this big, giant world of the enterprise. But I definitely can't guide you by myself. I need to bring in the experts, starting with our very first Black Hat survivor, and that is Heather Williams, manager of solutions engineering team at Ruckus Networks. Mo, you survived. How was it?
I did. It was fantastic as always. It was even better when it was over. But I have bathed, I have done laundry, I have recovered.
Fantastic. Well, you know, our next co-host actually survived because he's been writing about his experiences both at Black Hat and DEF CON. It looked to be a treasure trove of security information. Our very own Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. Curtis, was it worth the trip?
You hesitate to say anything was worth the trip to Black Hat and DEF CON, but it came very close. Got a lot of good conversations, a lot of great knowledge. Plus, I got to see a couple of my favorite folks, got to spend a little bit of time with our own Heather Williams, and got to see Padre, which, that might have made it worth the trip right there.
Well, we all know what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but it would be great to hear about the stories from that encounter one of these days for sure. Well, speaking of security and privacy, we have a great show for today. Now we're going to talk a little bit about warshipping, a new technique that kind of gives hackers access to enterprise offices, but we'll also discuss DEF CON's ICS Village. Of course, we also have a great guest, Matt Talbot, CEO of GoSpotCheck, to take us through the mobile workforce and ensuring better productivity with automation and analytics. But before we get into all that goodness, let's go ahead and jump into this week's blips. Now, we have all used antivirus software in the past, whether it be on our home devices or at work, and they've helped by being a watchdog or auxiliary service that monitors the ingestion of data to help battle that rogue code from taking over our devices, right? Well, however, they don't always move at the speed of the internet. Now, internet security is changing super fast these days, and there's been an increased number of researchers and hackers finding vulnerabilities, so it's really hard to keep up. Well, in this case, we have Kaspersky's Internet Security and Total Security. Now, a feature of these suites was to actually inject JavaScript into web pages, which would scan for links and provide a visual indicator to users if the link was safe. There was a little green icon that would show up whether the link was safe or not. Now, that was where the problem actually lies, because anytime you inject code into a site, the domain now owns that code after that. It's actually running on the domain, so it's theirs. That means they get to also use it to detect code and data that was actually injected in there. Well, in this case, Kaspersky was actually injecting a unique identifier into the HTML of every website a user visited. Now, why is this a problem? Well, the injection into the site's code, it actually makes it possible for the sites to identify people even when they're using incognito mode or even when they switch between Chrome, Firefox, or Edge. Now, once the ID was in the HTML, any of the sites could read it. Now, imagine Kaspersky's installed and it creating a special GUID tag that they injected. It was a machine-specific unique tag, so it wasn't actually per the application or that session, then injected in the website, which means that no matter if you wandered between browsers or not, it would still be there. Now, It was added in the fall of 2015, this feature, which means customers have been silently branded with this ID for almost 4 years. Now, after the issue was reported to Kaspersky's, they updated the suite to stop doing it in their June release. However, it just goes to show you, no matter what you do, you may be vulnerable to tracking and security tricks of that day.
Well, Google's Project Zero is old enough to go to kindergarten. So how's that zero-day hunt going? You know, way back in July of 2014, Google announced Project Zero, a research group built to reduce the number of zero-day vulnerabilities used in targeted attacks. 5 years later, team lead Ben Hawks took the Black Hat stage for an update. The big question? Has Project Zero achieved its goal of making zero-day hard? Project Zero's mission of making zero-day hard stemmed from its overall goal of finding attacks that are difficult to detect and highly reliable, Hawks said. The research team aimed to make it harder for cybercriminals to find and exploit these vulnerabilities by getting to them first. And the team points to vulnerabilities like Spectre and Meltdown as evidence of doing just that. But back to the question, has Project Zero achieved this goal of making zero-day hard? Not yet, Hawks said. While progress has been made and it's harder to find 0 days, there is still work to be done. In the next 5 years, one goal is to build a coalition of open attack research teams encompassing researchers from industry, academia, nonprofits, and government, all of which, of course, have huge roles to play in bug research.
Verizon sues Citi to avoid paying 5G fees and says the FCC has its back, because of course it does. Verizon has sued the city of Rochester, New York, in order to avoid paying fees for deploying 5G equipment and fiber lines. The lawsuit has been filed in a district court in New York and claims that Rochester is charging fees that are higher than what is allowed by law. This is a story that Twiat covered last year when the FCC issued its preemptive order aimed at limiting the fees and aesthetic requirements cities and towns can impose on carrier deployments. The difference is that last time it was Chibert ranting about what this could mean. Rochester has vowed to fight Verizon's lawsuit and called it frivolous, saying that other communication providers are complying with the law while building out their networks and paying the necessary fees. These fees are comparable to what other cities required. But this really isn't a frivolous lawsuit, because even though the FCC is being sued over this order by cities across the country, Verizon stands a good chance of winning its suit. This all comes out of Chairman Pai's claim that cities and towns are, quote, extracting as much money as possible in fees from the private sector. Pai further claimed that lowering the fees would boost broadband deployment. This is, at best, a disingenuous argument by Chairman Pai, and that's maybe the nicest thing I have to say about that. Because even Verizon has said that the FCC decision wouldn't change the pace of its 5G rollout. In other words, without the order, Verizon would still be rolling out 5G at the pace it is today, and putting the order in place did not increase the pace of their 5G rollout or the number of municipalities that can expect to see 5G in their area. So let's be clear. The order eliminates $2 billion worth of fees over 5 years, but that's less than 1% of the estimated $275 billion that carriers are going to have to spend to deploy 5G small cells throughout the United States. In Rochester, the fees Verizon complained about include $1,500 per year for attaching a small cell to a city-owned pole and arguments about fees for underground fiber. Every other carrier in Rochester has agreed to the fees. So why is Verizon protesting so much? We've talked about this FCC rule change that could potentially remove funding for community-based metro internet, and this is likely only the first of these types of pushbacks against cities and community internet fees. I mean, what's the point of having your former lawyer take over regulation of your industry unless you're going to take full advantage of the laws he crafts for you?
So Apple products, they're expensive, right? Especially their accessories. You want a nice proprietary lightning cable for your latest iPhone? Well, be ready to shell out some cash for it. Well, that's why the industry has answered with a bunch of third-party vendors providing less expensive alternatives. Now, the question is, can you trust them? Well, Mike Grover, a security researcher who works for Verizon Media, might have you second guessing which ones you buy. He was selling some at DEF CON called OMG cables, and they were just a measly $100. Now, sure, they were more expensive than the Apple equivalent, but this one can take over your device too. Now, not only that, does the cable look and feel identical to the Apple counterpart, but inside the USB connector is a hidden software and hardware, including a wireless access point. That's right, Wi-Fi inside your Lightning cable. No, I don't. There's a joke there somewhere, but I'm not really quick on my feet, so I'm not going to be able to tell you one. But when the cable is plugged into the computer, it can be triggered remotely to attempt to steal a user's login credentials or install malicious software. It's not a new concept, but in fact, the NSA actually reported that they made a cable just like that. And from what I can tell, it's pretty similar to that, what is called Cottonmouth, and it can be plugged into someone's computer to send software wirelessly. Now, the OMG cable was actually built with off-the-shelf parts, including using a small personal circuit board milling machine from Bantam Tools. Now, all this does is prove that it no longer requires massive resources or a nation state to create these types of devices anymore. Though the cable is intended to be used for security research, it makes you wonder, can you really trust the one you just bought on eBay?
Well, financial phishing is bad, and research shows that it's getting even worse. Phishing, especially phishing involving websites claiming to be from financial institutions, is growing, and the criminals are getting better at their craft. A new report shows how attackers are using messages that closely mimic legitimate banking promotions to entice users to open email messages and click on links, then using those clicks and opens as the first step in campaigns that steal credentials, embezzle funds, and plant ransomware or other malware across systems. Among the pieces of bad news is that one of the principal tools in fighting online fraud, that little green lock icon that shows the website is protected by encryption, has now been co-opted by criminals to create a false sense of security in their malicious web apps. The first 6 months of 2019 saw a 14% increase in the domains potentially used in phishing campaigns and double the number of phishing domains that were certified by registrars. Now, if you're keeping score, that works out to more than 1,900 potential phishing domains that were registered in the first half of 2019. Those criminal domains are increasingly using techniques like TLS or SSL certificates to look more legitimate. Researchers who did the report say that 8.5% of phishing domains that used a valid encryption certificate in 2018 will increase to 15% of those malicious sites with a legitimate green lock icon in 2019. They talked about OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act, as a war-fighting concept that everyone on both sides of this battle are using. And unfortunately, the problem right now is that the criminals are doing the OODA loop faster than the defenders.
Google's Nest launches network technology for the connected home. I really wanted to title this story with the nauseated face emoji, but I'm of two minds about this story, and that's something that won't surprise any of you who know me. Google's Nest Labs on Tuesday unveiled an industry group to encourage makers of smart home gadgets like locks and light bulbs to use Thread, a new standard for devices to communicate on a network. Nest is a smart thermostat maker that Google bought in January for $3.2 billion. But many of us remember it better because after a software update, it was announced that the thermostat could now be voice activated. This prompted many of us to say, wait a minute, there's been a microphone in those things the whole time? Nest is now attempting to lead the way on how not just humans, but household devices will speak to each other in the future. In June, Nest said it partnered with Mercedes-Benz, Whirlpool Corp, and a light bulb maker to integrate their products with its thermostats and smoke detectors. The new Thread group includes Samsung Electronics and chip companies ARM Holdings, Freescale Semiconductors, and Silicon Labs, and Big Ass Fans and lock maker Yale. Thread is an IPv6-based low-power mesh networking protocol with security features. The low-power features give it an advantage over other technologies such as Wi-Fi, NFC, Bluetooth, or Zigbee when connecting household devices. The security features are beguiling. Thread is IP addressable with cloud access and AES encryption. A BSD-licensed open-source implementation of Thread called OpenThread has also been released. With a product certification program starting next year, the Thread Working Group is trying to standardize how connected gadgets from different manufacturers interact. However, last week, Thread Group member Samsung Electronics also joined Intel and Dell to form a new consortium, And earlier in July, Microsoft became the 51st member of a competing group called All Seen Alliance, which is led by Qualcomm. And not to be left out of the churn, Apple, which is known for strictly controlling how other companies' products interact with its own, in June announced plans for HomeKit, its own framework for connecting household gadgets. Once again, it looks like devices are going to get along better than the standards committees.
Well, there's an old saying, you're only as good as your weakest link. Well, Paige Thompson proved that as a former Amazon Web Services employee. She was accused of stealing data from Capital One credit card applications. Now, how many people did she steal from? Well, just a measly 106 million of them. Now, how did she do it is the big question. Well, after a quick scan of her GitHub account, it was clear it contained evidence that early this year, someone exploited a firewall vulnerability in Capital One's network that allowed an attacker to execute a series of commands on the bank's servers. Now, Capital One has confirmed that the intrusion and said it affected about 100 million individuals in the U.S. and 6 million people in Canada. Personal information was taken, including names, incomes, dates of birth, addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses. Now, Social Security numbers for 140,000 people were also obtained, and about 80,000 bank account numbers were accessed. Now, social insurance numbers for about 1 million Canadians were also obtained. Now, no credit card numbers or login credentials were actually compromised here. However, after an investigation commences on her inside job, it was found that she had done more than just take the Capital One data. It now appears that she was able to take a massive amount of data, including from 30 other victim companies as well. Now, the only positive outcome here is that after reviewing the data, an attorney from Western Washington, Brian Morin, stated that it did not include additional personal information. Whew, at least it didn't do that. Now, all she had to do is one command executed to the firewall, which actually allowed an intruder to gain credentials for an administrator account. Now, this in turn enabled access to bank data stored under contract by the cloud computing company. Now, Paige, known as Erratic online, clearly had mental health issues. Now, this brings us back to that age-old conversation of, should companies like Amazon be watching the after-work behaviors of their employees to ensure a stable and safe work environment? Something to think about. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get to the bites, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And of course, that's LastPass. Now, people have their favorite tool that saves them time, it saves them money, and mine is LastPass. I use it every day. It's on all my browsers. It's everywhere. It literally saves me time and money. I don't even know I'm using it anymore. Now think about it. You have a username and password for every site you go to, every site, and especially the ones that are important to you, like your financial sites, your business sites, your social networks, your email, you name it. You have a password for it, a different one most likely. Now for me, it's 5 different banks, and I'm supposed to remember all those username and passwords. I definitely cannot. It becomes impossible to manage, and you don't want to write it down anywhere, right? You don't want to put it on a sticky note. You don't want to put it in your email because you're going to lose it, right? It's an open text. People can find it. That's where LastPass comes in and saves us all. LastPass automatically remembers and fills your passwords anytime, anywhere on your computer, your mobile device. All you need to do is remember that master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Now, I got hooked on it when I started using it on my desktop here, but of course, I use it all the time on all of my devices. In fact, I use it in every one of my browsers as a browser extension for pretty much all the browsers out there: Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Opera, more. Plus, on my mobile device, I have an Android and iOS device. It works great there as well. I don't have to remember the passwords anymore. Not only that, it generates passwords for you. So if you don't want to create your password, they will generate the password for you, stored in their vault. And bam, you don't have to worry about it. Now, I actually remember a while back, my family called me and they said, "Oh my gosh, we have to pay a bill. We don't remember the password. Can you help us?" And all I did was log into my LastPass vault with my master password, and boom, LastPass was able to save me time. I was able to give them that password. They could log in and pay the bill. Now I'm talking about my personal experiences here. Now, about LastPass, it also works amazing for enterprises too. Now, they have a brand new business lineup with fantastic new features that will actually improve the security across your company. Now, it'll also make it easy for users to get their work done. Now, listen to this. LastPass Enterprise now includes single sign-on with over 1,200 pre-integrated apps. They also have MFA, which goes beyond the two-factor authentication through the use of biometrics and factors such as geolocation. They also ensure that the right users are accessing the right data at the right time without adding complexity to the pipeline. Plus, LastPass Identity is a combination of LastPass Enterprise and LastPass MFA. And it provides really a holistic view of the end user activity from a single dashboard that covers passport authentication and all the apps that use it. Now, enterprise is always battling people trying to breach their networks. In fact, here, listen to this data. 81% of breaches are caused by weak or reused passwords. Well, that survey also says that 32% of the employees also share their passwords. Well, they want to make it easy for you to share passwords. They want to make it more secure. So your employees will have their own vault. They can manage and access their passwords. In fact, organizations can set master password requirements, restrict access, everything. Plus, get this, there's now Active Directory integration, which means you really don't have to remember anything but your AD credential, and that's it. Now you have access to your passwords as well. Now, for me, that makes it not only really easy because I remember my domain password every day. It makes it super easy. Now, I love LastPass. I will use it for life, but I'll tell you one thing. Protect yourself as well, your business with LastPass. It's the #1 most preferred password manager, trusted by over 43,000 businesses. Twit uses LastPass Enterprise, and we're always excited about using it and by seeing the new products that they come out with. Now, LastPass is bridging the gap between passwords and identity by making access and authentication simple and secure for both IT and end users. Join the thousands of businesses who've signed up for LastPass and are loving and trusting it. Visit LastPass.com/twit to find out how they can help you. And that's LastPass.com/twit. And we thank LastPass for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's that time of the show where we get to discuss some of the recent enterprise tech topics of the week. We call it the Bites. And what better way to start that talk but about war shipping? Mo, I'll throw it over to you.
I'm used to being worshipped, but this puts a whole new spin on it. Hack in the Box. This is a story that marries the modern maker movement with the creativity of Churchill's toy shop from World War II. If this story has a hero, it's Adafruit. We've all heard of war dialing and war driving, and at least some of us have cringed at the terms war cycling, war jogging, and even war droning. Well, now we have war shipping. Penetration testers will go to great lengths to demonstrate the weaknesses in a client's security posture in order to mitigate them before an actual bad actor takes advantage. And often these make for some of the most compelling briefings at security conferences. But IBM's X-Force Red team recently showed they know how to work smarter, not harder, and in fact never had to leave home to get in the door at targeted sites. And the targets weren't even aware they were exposed until they got the bad news. And in true DEF CON fashion, where the point of some of the talks seemed to be a variation of Name That Tune, where the speaker shows how he's doing the same thing others are doing with a $200 off-the-shelf toy, but they're doing it with a $6 Arduino and 3 Legos. This team showed how for under $100 and some compact hardware, they can turn a shipped package into a Trojan horse for attacks. So we've seen drop boxes before, and these are covert drop boxes that can take the form of device chargers, Wi-Fi routers, and even power strips. Heck, the original war shipping attack was literally the Trojan horse. However, the X-Force Red team showed that how by using a Raspberry Pi Zero W, a small battery, and a cellular modem, they assembled a mobile attack platform that neatly fit within a cardboard spacer, dropped into a shipping box, or embedded in objects such as a stuffed animal or a plaque. That's right. They've weaponized cardboard. Now, you can just let a shipping company do the work for you. IBM X-Force Red Global Managing Partner Charles Henderson noted that, you can ship cell phones and things like that, but those tend to look suspicious. So what's cool about this is that it's in the wall of the box. It can easily be built into the cardboard. And so now you can send maybe a plaque to the new Chief Information Security Officer of the Year, and if you put a $13 solar charger panel on the plaque, this makes a permanent fixture in a CISO's office. So this turned out to be a pen test that was wildly successful. And like all pen tests, of course, they had complete permission from the company that they were doing this against, but every single one of these cardboard Trojan horses was welcomed in with open arms. And what's more concerning is that they were actually able to get one of the boxes into a company's secure research center. So this is a place where no cell phones are allowed. They had a rig that was able to store data on an SD card until they dumped the box. And once the box was outside the secure area where the RF shielding was gone, they could then exfil the data back in. So this can be a little bit alarming. And there's some other details that I want to go into, but I'd like to flip this over to my co-hosts, because I'm laughing about this because it's a combination of what next or what do we have to do to win sort of thing. Curtis, I want to ask you, we were just in the ad, we were just talking about default passwords, weak passwords, reused passwords. We're still not even breaking even on that battle. The amount of traffic that we see on the Black Hat network that's sent in clear text every year is purely depressing. What is it now that we have to worry about the Trojan box? What is it that you think InfoSec people are going to need to do to prepare their customers, their clients, or just train their users to keep them a little bit better prepared?
Well, I at DEF CON went to a presentation from the head of security for the Democratic National Committee. And one of the things that he said was that they're treating everything in security as an IT security problem. And I think that what we're going to be seeing is more and more of the physical security folks at companies doing exactly that, treating everything as IT security. I mean, in this case, we have something that could be arriving at the mailroom. Nothing about computers at all, apparently, but suddenly it's not a physical security issue where a couple of years ago you might have been looking for white powder or some sort of explosive device, but it's a cybersecurity problem. So I think we're getting to the point of wanting to treat pretty much anything that comes in the door as suspicious until proven innocent. And for a lot of companies, that's going to mean doing much more rigorous inspection by people who aren't trained to do it than ever before.
Right. So you're talking about looking at the receptionist and trying to figure out how to. She already has to worry about tailgaters and things like that. Now she has to be worried about a box being dropped off, and whether that actually has technology in there. So do we need to? I'm going to throw this one to you, Lou. Do we need to start including not X-ray machines, but maybe some kind of devices that can scan incoming packages to detect tech-enabled devices? And how practical is that?
Yeah, I don't know how practical. I mean, you see a lot of these international packages. They go through X-ray. In fact, they're allowed to open them. These types of things when they detect specific things, especially electronics or batteries or that kind of thing, perishables. I don't think that's scalable, though. I don't think that that's a model that we can follow without having to hire, like Amazon's doing, their own kind of shipping company and their own additional people to support that. So I just don't think the infrastructure can support it. But another thing too is, I've heard of some local organizations, local cities, actually going into the process of thinking, okay, well, if we even detect something that's got a battery or actually is on, it actually detects a signature, electronic signature coming from it. They don't want things that are being shipped that actually are capable of being turned on or have batteries actually installed in them. And so they go through a more rigorous process to determine where they've been shipped from and that kind of thing. I don't even know if that's even scalable. So, this is a hard problem. I mean, basically, hackers are finding little intricacies within our processes today that there's no checks and balances there. And, that will continue to happen, especially ones like this, which is really, really hard to fix. So I actually don't have an answer for you.
I always say I'm waiting for the smarter people to answer some of these questions that are coming up. So one of the things that was interesting about this actual the solution that they had put together, and they're not releasing a lot of the details for obvious reasons. They're pen testers. They're not trying to spread the capability. But they custom wrote the code to make it as low powered using as possible to extend the life of this device. But they also had it so that they could talk to it at set times, so they could check to see where it was. And so with the way shipping companies are, you can fairly accurately predict where in transit this box is. And then, of course, with GPS coordinates, you can determine where it has arrived. One of the things that they got sort of as a bonus, if you will, is that because it was scanning on the Wi-Fi side, it was actually doing a pen test of everything that it was seeing in transit. So this included the Wi-Fi on the airplanes, the rigs as the trucks were moving across the country for the delivery area, and so that part was actually pretty interesting. Learning more about the Adafruit. This is the whole story is actually really interesting. And for those of you who weren't able to see the presentation at Black Hat, the PDF of it will be available, I don't know, in 2 to 8 weeks, depending on how long they upload that. But I have one more question, and I'm going to throw this one back to Curtis, because I don't know if you got to see that presentation, but you certainly were there. One of the advantages, or one of the parts of the attack of this, was that it was doing old-fashioned Wi-Fi sniffing. So they were turning it on and then just capturing the packets, getting the hash of the pre-shared key, and then exfiltrating it so that the system, the more robust system back at home base, could do the cracking, and then from that do sideways attacks. So and I'm going to get to my question in a second, but this seems to be, the fairly easy answer to that is enterprise level encryption and not just a pre-shared key. How much of this is just sort of the interesting thing du jour and is detracting from attention for like the real honest to God basic things that we need to be doing, like not resharing keys or not reusing passwords, putting in .1x encryption, making sure that your servers are patched, that kind of thing. How much of this is just, wow, it's got a sexy name?
Well, there's going to be a piece of this that plays to our fascination with the latest shiny object. And, I'll admit, I'm a journalist. I depend on the latest shiny object to give me something to write about and keep me gainfully employed. So there is a piece of that. Going back and constantly saying, you've got to update your level of encryption. You've got to use the latest protocols rather than old, known, broken protocols. The basic blocking and tackling. It's up there with all of the people in the healthcare field who say, you really need to get a decent night's sleep. You need to eat well. You need to move around. And we would much rather focus on the latest fad diet or newest miracle metal we can wear on a pinky ring or something like that to keep us healthy. The fact is, though, that this does, for some number of situations, represent a very real, fairly difficult to guard against threat vector. And so it can't be just blithely passed off. As these systems get smaller and cheaper, it's going to be much easier to not only grab shared keys, but to put things like, simple capture and fuzzing technology on one of these very, very small processors. And if you don't have to go through the Wi-Fi, if you have instead, say, a very simple cell network transceiver, you can do all kinds of things. And those now are very small. These are very compact. And they represent a very real threat. So on the one hand, the greatest volume of threats is going to come through the same sort of threat vectors that we've seen for the past decade. and organizations need to do the same very basic things to protect against them. On the other hand, just because those traditional threat vectors haven't gone away doesn't mean we can ignore the latest shiny object.
Fantastic. Thank you, Curtis.
Curtis.
Well, you know what? Let's put that one to bed. I think that we talked about it in the bites, talked about it in the blips. We do have another one we want to talk about, though. We want to throw it over to you, Curtis. But I want to hear about the DEF CON ICS Village.
Right. I spent some time at the ICS Village. And for those who don't live in the business, ICS is the Industrial Control System, sort of the IoT for industry. And they have their own village at DEF CON. And I sat down and got to speak with one of the founders, a guy named Bryson Bort. He is founder and CEO of Scythe and a number of other security organizations. Very smart guy. And we talked about not only what they were doing this year, but how he's been interacting with the Department of Homeland Security, which hopes to make use of the skills and the knowledge present in the ICS Village in the future to be better at protecting critical infrastructure. Now, we talked a great deal about electric utilities, and Bort said that 30 years ago, power went one way. It was very simple. The utility created it, the consumer took it in and used it in their homes and businesses. Renewables have rather famously given us a two-way street. Now you have things like the electric meters that run in both directions so that at your residence or your place of business, you can have solar cells, you can have wind, you can have a number of other different things that feed power back into the grid when you are producing it in excess of what you're using. Now, this makes for an electric grid that is just generations more sophisticated and more complex than it was those few decades ago. In addition, he said there's another problem. For decades, the electric grid was based on the idea that what was delivered to residences was a known quantity. It was in virtually every case going to be 240 or 220 single phase. If you were really lucky and you had a transformer sitting on a pole in your backyard, you might be able to get 243 phase if you wanted to do, say your own induction furnace at home. But for most residences, 240 single phase was all you had to deal with. Anything with a higher voltage than that, where the utility was concerned, was going to be a commercial plant. I've worked in steel mills where we had, 17,000 plus volts coming in and basically our own substation, but that wasn't a residence. With the advent of electric vehicles, that calculation is changing. Bort talked about things like the Porsche Taycan, which should be out next year, and their rapid charging solution is estimated to be using things like 800 volt power. That means that it's got to be doing some upstep transforming as it comes from the electric grid. And if it's going to be one of these systems that uses the excess electricity from the car to feed back to the electric grid, then you've got to have more transformers involved. Computers are controlling all of this because it has to be regulated and measured. And all of this is making things much more complex, not only to manage, but to protect. So with all of this going on, I had to ask Bort about this thing that we've heard about threat actors being in the electric grid. We've heard from a number of sources that there isn't really a major grid segment in the U.S. where threat actors aren't there. They haven't been there. And he said it's very true, but he said that what they have seen is that these operations in the grid are intelligence operations. The malicious actors, they go into a system and basically they're probing. They see how far they can go. They're seeing what the response is. They're measuring it. They're storing that information and they're waiting. He said he really believes that this is the sort of thing that they are using and storing in case some sort of, and I love this, kinetic activity breaks out. This is Army speak for throwing bombs at one another. But Bort said that same possibility is what helps him be confident about these actors not launching a first strike. Now, let's remember, Bryson Bort got his initial degrees, academic degrees, at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He has been an Army officer, and so that's affected or not affected. That's informed the way he thinks. But as he said, if they launch some sort of attack against our electric grid, our response is not going to be a hacking attack on their grid. Remember those kinetic activities I talked about? That would be our response. As he said, we have lots and lots of bombs, and doggone it, we know how to use them. So we've got this very flexible, very dynamic threat environment in our critical infrastructure. And we were talking, frankly, about the electric infrastructure. This has nothing to say about things like the natural gas pipelines, the petroleum pipelines, all of the other critical infrastructure that we have in this country. So I want to turn to my co-hosts. And Lou, I'm going to turn to you first. Given the fact that households are part of this threat dynamic, given the number of those households in the U.S., is ICS a security that actually has, is it a problem that has a solution? Can you imagine a solution that covers this vast number of physical locations?
I don't think it does. I think at this point, there's already things in the market that are vulnerable. And I think that that's a problem or companies and organizations are going to have to spend more time thinking back. Okay, well, I was just telling the story in the chat where I used to work for Anheuser-Busch as a system control engineer, and we used to put out PLCs out in the brew houses and so on that were on the network. And, we didn't really, because it was a closed network, we paid less attention to security and so on there, people connecting to them. But, years later, I'm sure they've done that work. But in the same sense, there's lots of organizations like that. A lot of, especially in the consumer space, there's the whole concept of now these, refrigerators and other things, talking to networks and, passing telemetry data and so on. How secure are those? So there's a lot of things when it comes to, wholesale and manufacturing that they need to pay more attention to. And I really think it starts with the organization that's implemented the solution. I think that's where we can start by creeping along and making improvements to the infrastructure and to the things that they use, both in their networking and both in their manufacturing and in their processes, to make sure that they can start closing the door on some of these things and start making themselves more vulnerable. But other companies are going to have to pay more attention, like airline companies and all these different types of transportation organizations are going to have to pay more attention to what they're putting in the pipeline, because it creates a less secure environment. But I don't think there's a one silver bullet that's going to fix it all.
We constantly look for that one silver bullet, and you're right. It's hard to find. Heather, I want to ask you this question. If you were running one of these companies that's responsible for the critical infrastructure, how comfortable would you be with the idea of some sort of partnership with your customers, whether they're residences or businesses? Do you think that partnership is going to be required, or, as Lou said, is it something that you're going to have to plan to do entirely on your own?
Okay, so let's be clear. If I was running at one of the electric companies, we would all be cooking on barbecues because we would be in so much trouble. But the idea of turning over, you were talking about silver bullet, and of course the thought that jumps into the mind is of course defense in layers and defense in depth. So there's no one single bullet and no one single point of failure. The idea. Wow, I'm going to go back to a line from House. People lie. I wouldn't trust people. So turning over security at that level at the consumer level is to me just really scary. But then again, if you look at where we are in the IoT market, that's part of the origin of the problem. And when you bring in consumer level devices that with consumer level upgradability and hardware and thought process into the software and the upgradability and the whole designing from security point of view instead of just does the light bulb turn on. This is why we have the problem we have with IoT, and it's I take it that's the threat vector that you're referring to as it's spreading out. I would say that putting any eggs in that basket right now. Although, as we heard in the previous blip, maybe threat is going to be something that can help us with that. But I would say, and ICS, by the way, is a really interesting area in InfoSec. Not the least of which because some of the more colorful and interesting people in InfoSec are pretty active in that area. But I would say that it's got to start with the in-depth at the source level, and I'm not so sure that we need to worry about the leaves as they branch out. I don't know that an ATP is going to use a Nest thermostat, for example, as the threat vector. I would say that it would be more along the lines of, say, a Stuxnet level.
That whole Stuxnet thing keeps coming back as it's going to, because it's sort of the poster child for what can go wrong with ICS hacks. Well, as my co-host said, we're going to be wrestling with this for a long time, and the folks over in the ICS Village were talking about how it's going to be more complex and more active going forward. I'm looking forward to seeing them again next year, and maybe even seeing some of the Village folks at some conferences between now and next DEF CON. Well, I think we're going to wrap up there because I know we've got a great guest. So, Lou, I'm going to throw it back to you to take us to the next part of TWIAT.
Thanks, Curtis. Well, before we get to my favorite part of the show, we get to have a guest to come in and drop some knowledge on the TWIAT, right? We got to thank a great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is NetScout. Now, digital transformations are really hard, right? I mean, it's hard to really increase the speed of innovation. It's really hard to get operational agility, and organizations spend time and time again to meet today's demands in the digital world. It really needs to be bootstrapped with a bold new IT strategy. Well, as the pace of change continues to exponentially increase, so does the risk of failure. Now, raising the stakes for CIOs, architects, and IT operations. Now, simply put, digital transformation has changed the game, but NetScout has a different perspective, one that's built for the era of digital and data center transformation. Now, it's called Visibility Without Borders, and this is a real-time visibility that extends to wherever your technology, infrastructure, and business applications reside. Now, as the world leader in transforming packet data, NetScout's smart data delivers high resolution and continuous monitoring across the network and the data center, the cloud, 5G, and more. It's a great service. Now, already in use, monitoring and securing some of the world's most critical commercial and public service infrastructures, NetScout's next generation level of visibility provides the holistic perspective that IT teams are really seeking. See more at netscout.com. That is netscout.com, netscout.com. And we thank NetScout for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, that brings us to my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the Twilight Ryan. Today we have Matt Talbot, CEO and co-founder of GoSpotCheck. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me to the whole Twilight gang.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, before we get to GoSpotCheck, our audience really loves to hear origin stories, people's journey through tech. Can you maybe take us on a short journey of how you got started in tech and what kind of brought you to GoSpotCheck?
Yeah, absolutely. So it would definitely take up multiple episodes to go through my whole story and the number of things I've screwed up and learned along the way. So I'll give you a shortened version. But I actually started my career at Johnson & Johnson doing corporate finance and analytics, and learned a ton about how large enterprises get insights into their data and how they try to make decisions. And that was really transformational for me in my journey. And I knew after that I wanted to get into starting and building businesses. And really, we got GoSpotCheck started back in 2011. And most of our thesis was around the idea that in 2011, most of mobile tech really came down to Angry Birds. It was primarily used as a consumer platform, mostly for games that you play while you're waiting in line. And we said, how are we going to build B2B applications on top of mobile that can change the way that businesses make decisions? And so for us, we started off on that journey. And it was, multiple years of experimenting with different approaches and different business models. And then for us, the business really began to take off between kind of 2013 and 2015. And I think that was about the time that a lot of our customer base was looking for digital transformation with this kind of specific mobile focus. So that's kind of how we got to where we are.
Fantastic. Now, we all know about the mobile and global workforce. It's continuing to expand exponentially. Obviously, there's a large number of organizations that are kind of moving to the mobile space. Now, can you maybe just take us through the landscape here? Like, what are some of the major gaps you're seeing even in the mobile workforce today?
Yeah, I think we're still in the first inning in terms of enterprise mobile. I think we're very, very early. If you look globally, there are 2 billion workers that aren't desk-bound as part of their work. And if you look at enterprise technology investment, 80 to 90% of it has really been aimed at that desk-bound workforce. So IT, oftentimes inside sales, in-house marketing groups. And I think a lot of the gaps are around how do you build and enable delightful experiences for a frontline workforce that is often hourly or very task-based. And often very young, which means the expectations for the usability of the software, the experience of working with information at their fingertips, the bar is set very, very high. And so I think we've begun to see companies make more and more investment in really equipping that front line. But I think with all that said, there is still an incredibly long ways to go. The potential to untap everything that mobile can do with its contextual capabilities, with its constant connected state, its GPS, its camera. I think there's a lot of the meat on the bone still, and we're really excited to be kind of forging into that future.
Fantastic. Now, GoSpotCheck seems to kind of have a strategic, you kind of move strategically into markets, and it uses very specific, it goes against very specific targets. Can you maybe take us through some of those use cases and some of the targets you're targeting right now with some of your solutions?
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have a very broad vision, and we try to build out our platform horizontally so we can equip any number of different organizations with enterprise mobile solutions. But we certainly go to market in a very use case and vertically focused manner. So you mentioned earlier in the show, Lou, you used to be at Anheuser-Busch, a great customer of ours. They have about 15,000 field sales reps across the United States. Well, how do you align those field sales reps and ensure that they're implementing the right programs and strategies on a day-to-day basis at every account call? What we do is we put the GoSpotCheck software in the hands of those field sales reps, which helps them spell out their priorities, capture information in the account that can help someone like Anheuser-Busch get real-time operational data on what's happening in every single account, and ultimately be more successful at their job. And so you take something that used to be done with pen, paper, Excel, maybe scribbling notes, or even in some cases with a heavy CapEx expenditure to buy custom hardware with custom software built on top, Now all these reps are simply using their smartphones. And we're building software on top of that that enables them to be highly directed, much more productive, and hopefully they enjoy their day-to-day a lot more. And if we're doing our job, they aren't spending one day a week doing an admin day where they're writing up reports on every account visit. They're just going about their day as usual and spending a couple minutes in our application to capture data and update HQ on what they've been up to.
Fantastic. Now, it sounds like obviously you said you do have a broad platform, but you do go deep on specific use cases. It sounds like in order to do that, you have to have some really deep domain expertise, like you were talking about Anheuser-Busch. Now, do you actually have experts in every area? How do you go about doing that? And is that something that you actually do? Do you go deep in some areas and you become those domain experts?
Our experience is we generally sell larger enterprise deals. And that means that there's complexity in implementation, and it means absolutely that we have to have domain expertise. So there's one thing that we have that's very much in the spirit and culture of our company. It's one of our core values, is that we go to bed smarter. And what that means is that it's our job to learn the industry and learn the domain and make sure that we go and sit with the prospective buyer. We understand what makes their business tick, and we can help the software accomplish their business goals. With that as well, we do hire a mix from people with a background in software and a mix of people with background in industry. We've been able to do that across some of our core segments like retail, as well as beer, wine, spirits, and consumer goods. And that helps us kind of make sure that we really are a subject matter expert, because in our estimation, certainly the technology is critical, and any organization going on a digital transformation journey needs to be thinking a lot about the technical capabilities that they're implementing. But we view it just as important to think deeply about the vendor and partner that you're working with. And since we emphasize service so much, and we really emphasize a knowledge of our customer's business, it means that we have to know what we're talking about. But the great thing is, from a buyer's perspective, it's de-risking and implementation, because they have a partner that's really in the transformation process with them every step of the way.
Right. Now, one of the big things I always kind of get into is kind of localization, because you're obviously global. You have a lot of global solutions out there, and you tend to obviously provide solutions. You provide, it sounds like, a template of solutions, and then you work really closely with the customer. Do you find that sometimes global solutions in the similar space, you actually have to put more effort into allowing them to customize it, or maybe even go back and change the template because they do things differently globally? Or do you find that your templates usually have a wide array of adoption and they don't have to be kind of localized in that sense?
Yeah, we find that generally across all of our implementations, whether they're here based in North America, or whether they're more of an international or global deal, our kind of out-of-the-box software will get them 70% of the way there. I mean, we have a fantastic professional services team that can kind of help customize the last 30% of that journey, or it's something that they can do on their own. We're really big believers in kind of a no-code approach to our platform, meaning that a business user should be able to drive and configure everything that they need out of the system. We're obviously here to help, though. I will say, though, that you're certainly hitting on a really critical topic, which is this kind of tension between everybody getting exactly what they want out of a system, so this custom orientation, with how do you provide scalable software to global organizations. It's a challenge. It's our job to bridge that gap and ensure that when our software is implemented a customer, it's working the way that they do, and they're not having to change their way of working to match our software. And we think that's a really, really critical way to approach the problem space. I think from our experience, we're in 70 countries, so we have relatively good scale outside of the United States at this point. We definitely find different ways of working, different routes to market, different processes that may be in place. And the good news is that the platform is very easy to flex into those types of use cases. So we might come to a customer with a handful of templates that have been very successful across either their own organization in the United States or comparable organizations that can, help get them started. But ultimately, they're going to be driving that to meet exactly their needs. And if you look at the way of selling consumer goods in somewhere like Europe, it is actually totally different than the way that they go to the market in the U.S. Part of that, as you know, at least in the beer, wine, spirits space, is driven by the 3-tier system in the United States. That means that every product that an alcohol supplier makes has to go through a distributor to get to a retailer. That changes the dynamic of how they go to market. In Europe and in other parts of the world, oftentimes they're actually doing direct store distribution and direct store delivery themselves. So with all that said, certainly we see differences. I think that the one common theme that we see across all the verticals we work in, whether it's consumer goods, beer, wine, spirits, facilities, restaurants, retail, is that every organization is looking to get more granular and smarter with data. So it's no longer about making these grand plans that apply to every place in the United States or every place even in this region. It's how do we drive the right activity at this specific place at this specific time that's based on the information that we have. And that not only makes sense for the business because it allows them to create really granular plans about what's important, it's ultimately how consumers want experiences. And I think that's a critical change that we're certainly seeing and one that our software is trying to enable.
Desiree, well, I do want to bring my co-host back in because they do have a bunch of questions. Curtis, I want to start with you. You want to talk a little bit about digital transformation?
Absolutely. Now, you've been talking about how your software enables digital transformation, how your customers are big into digital transformation and all of that. And I come at this from the perspective of someone who has been a remote worker for companies since 1991. And so I definitely have seen how things have changed dramatically in that time. But here's my question for you. When you use that word or that phrase, digital transformation, what do you mean? What is digital transformation in the context of how your company is becoming involved in helping your customers do what they're trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question because I would certainly agree that it's an overloaded phrase and it's used all the time. Where we kind of come in is we look at one very specific part of the journey. And I think there's two trends that are driving this. The first thing is that a lot of digital transformation efforts are focused on driving the customer experience. So, for example, a retailer thinking through the process of how do their shoppers maybe buy online and pick up in store. Well, they need to make a lot of investment in technology in order to enable that. We think one of the biggest missing pieces that is focused on the employee experience. Because if you walk into any number of these stores or imagine these trucks pulling up at the back of locations and dropping product off, or even when you check into a hotel, you might see that there's a nightly checklist sitting there next to the reception agent that's checking you in. There are so many paper-based processes that are required for these workers to fill out day in and day out that it can be very overwhelming and very cumbersome. So where we come in is we help digitize the things that were typically done on pen and paper or typically done in Excel. And what that means is that we're providing an easier and more contextual user experience. We're reducing the time for them to accomplish that goal, and we're ultimately giving the enterprise more visibility into the day-to-day.
Okay. That sounds very logical. That helps me a lot. So my next question is this. When I have been to conferences like SAP Sapphire Now, I hear bits and pieces of that company talking about many of the same things you're talking about here. So how does what you offer differ from what a company could get from the various parts of, say, an SAP?
I mean, I think that's a battle that, any startup or growth company will constantly face, which is how do you compete against the big established enterprise players? And we certainly have no chance of competing with the sales or marketing channels that SAP has in place. I think what we do have going for us, though, is that we were born in the mobile era. And what I mean by that is that our technology has been built from the ground up to be mobile first. So that allows us to drive an excellent experience. We're not trying to take something that was built for a desktop and port it into something that's used on mobile. So that allows us to capture all of those capabilities in a very rich and native way, which we think drives ultimately the best end user experience, which is critical to the way that we sell. I think the second thing is, which I think this is similar to any positioning for a small company against someone like SAP, is that we obsess over this very particular capability. And that means that we have a depth of knowledge within one domain space that, in our opinion, is much more relevant for somebody going on some of this journey compared to buying something from a big established vendor as kind of an add-on. We also, of course, focus a lot on integration. So we view ourselves as definitely not a replacement for an SAP or a Salesforce, but really as a complement. So how do we build something that has that great, delightful end user experience on mobile, that's fast, easy to use, offline capable, GPS aware, photo heavy, and then integrate that data back with the systems of record, so the enterprises are also leveraging their investments that they've already made into these large systems.
So that's really interesting. And I'm actually going to I think maybe ask you to repeat a part of your answer, just because I'm going to phrase it in a different way, the question. So I'm going to make an analogy, and you can come in and tell me how my analogy has broken down, all right? So it sounds a little bit like Slack, Salesforce.com, and Basecamp had a superhero baby. Where does that break down, and how right am I in that depiction?
I've never heard that before, Mo, but I think that might go on our website now going forward. I love it. And I think that is very much what we're about. I think in the simplest sense, what we're trying to do is we are digitizing forms and tasks at the end of the day. But that's not really the answer, because there are layers of communication and alignment that happen through our platform, and there's a huge analytical capability. So instead of just being a task system where it's about, okay, did I accomplish this thing or not? And just being a form system, which is I want to take something that was maybe on paper and digitize it and make it, more ready for digital consumption. We're kind of combining these elements into something that is data-driven, which means everything we do produces analytics. So instead of just basic tasks, we're collecting really rich information from the field that is hyper-contextualized. Instead of it just being about one-way communication, we're providing alignment from typically a headquarter out to any number of thousands of different end users across an enterprise, which is critical for driving alignment, training, and understanding of the mission at hand. And then I think, finally to that point, we're very much thinking about everything from an intelligence first perspective. So our goal is to give our customers answers at the end of the day. That is the thing that they're buying. And the answers are things such as, was the food safety process completed today at location 123 in Chicago, Illinois? Well, that's a critical question to have answered, because it can be a leading indicator to other things going wrong or other things working within an enterprise. So I'd say that's a pretty good positioning. Certainly, one of the things that we constantly are challenged with is we believe that we are building something that's differentiated and unique, which means it doesn't fit into the neatest category assignments, right? We wouldn't consider ourselves a direct competitor to a lot of organizations. We consider ourselves doing something kind of unique and different. I would say the closest kind of comparison set would be, the no-code, low-code platform space, where it's really around answering the question, hey, how do you enable business users to digitize processes, trigger workflows, and get reports from that information?
Makes sense. Now we're kind of in obviously we've talked about this before. We're in this, we're in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. Different technologies are kind of driving that at different sectors. That being things like ML and AI are kind of being part of that. And businesses really have this inherent need to really take all the data they're collecting, even from some of the applications that you're doing, to really produce actionable analytics and insights. And of course, they also needed to help with some of the automation processes and remove some of the human interaction in some of their processes. How can GhostSpot Check actually help here? Are you guys working in that space? Are you seeing a trend here? Like, how is it going about? How are you guys going about that?
Absolutely. We're definitely very bullish on machine learning, and we think there's a lot of opportunities to apply this technology within the enterprise. I think to some extent, with our experience with our customers, it still kind of lives in that hype cycle world where there's a lot of talk about it, but not yet a ton of real business application. We think we have some really good approaches here. One of the areas where we're doubling down specifically is computer vision. So if you think about our particular user base, which again tends to be this frontline workforce across these different categories and industries, images are really, really central to providing documentation of the work that's been done. So the question now is, how can you use machine learning and computer vision on top of images that are captured within our application to drive deeper intelligence and to speed up the workflow for end users? So again, imagine that you're someone that's out there selling soda. And one of the key parts of selling soda into a convenience store is getting as many facings as you can within the cooler doors of that account. Well, one of the things that corporate often wants to know is, well, how many facings do we have and how many facings do our competitors have in this account? Well, for a field salesperson that's running around maybe visiting 10, 15 different accounts a day, that's a super cumbersome process, right? They have to sit there and count, okay, these are all the things on the shelf. This is how many they total. This is how many we have. Well, this is a great opportunity to use computer vision. And that's something that we're building out, where now our users can simply snap a picture of that cooler and instantly, well, in a process of about 30 seconds, we're able to run some algorithms on top of that image and say, okay, we've identified at an item level, here are all the things in the cooler. And that means that your brands have a 36% share. Oh, and on top of that, the goal is to have a 40% share in this account. So we need to go out and get it 4 additional facings. So go talk to the manager and try to upsell them.
Fantastic. Well, as Matt Talbert, CEO and co-founder of GoSpotCheck, thank you so much for being here. We're running a little bit low on time, but we do want to give you a chance to maybe tell the people at home. Obviously, there's organizations out there that are like, wow, I have a lot of these like processes that I want to get started and I want to automate and I want to digitally transform. Where can they go? Where can they go? Where can they get started? How do they contact you? Where's the best place to go?
Definitely check out our website at gospotcheck.com. We have a lot of great content on there of different use cases and case studies that might be useful for your audience. The second thing is send us a note at hello@gospotcheck.com. We're always quick to reply and always happy to hear from anyone on how we could help them drive a digital transformation process.
Fantastic. Well, folks, you've done it again. You sat through another hour of the best dang podcast, enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 Hacks in the Box. But I especially want to thank my co-hosts in crime. They really make this show possible, starting with our very own Heather Williams. Mo, thank you so much for being here. Where can the folks at home find you and all of your work?
Well, anyone who wants to come out and eat to East Texas and get some barbecue can try scare me up. But mostly I'm at being irreverent on Twitter at Mo Better Wi-Fi. And I am happily at home, at least for a few more weeks.
No better place than home. Thank you, Mo. Thank you so much. Of course, we have to thank our other co-host in crime and one of our favorite security journalists, Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, where can the folks at home find you and all of your work?
Well, as always, they can find my writing at darkreading.com. And starting next week, I'm going to be focusing on a particular part of dark reading. You can find most of my work starting later next week at a part of dark reading called The Edge. Now, this is where I'm going to be doing some longer pieces, some more in-depth, some, I think, really interesting stuff. So I hope that our readers will come over and check out The Edge at Dark Reading. And as always, you can find out when I'm writing because I'll post it on my Twitter feed at KG4GWA.
Well, folks, we also have to thank you as well. You're the person who drops in each and every week to watch and listen to our show to get your enterprise goodness. We want to make it easy for you to watch and listen and catch up on your enterprise news for the week. So go to our show page right now, twit.tv/Twyat. There you'll find all of the amazing back episodes, of course, all the show notes, information about the co-hosts, our guest information, and of course, links to all the shows, all the stories we do during the show. And more importantly, next to those videos there you see on the site, you'll get those helpful download or subscribe links. They'll help you get your audio version of your choice, your video version of your choice, your HD video of your choice. Of course, subscribe and really help support our show. Now, it's the best way to really stay on top of your enterprise and IT news for the week. So definitely subscribe. And after you subscribe, share the show with your friends, your coworkers, your family. We want to keep doing this show, and the way we do that is if you support us by subscribing. Now, after you subscribe, also remember we do the show live each and every week at live.twit.tv at 1:30 p.m. Pacific on Fridays. Come see how the show is run. Come see how the pizza is made behind the scenes. We love doing the show, and of course, join in live. And if you can join in live, come to the chat room live. We have a really great set of characters in our chat room at irc.twit.tv. You can jump in there. You can ask questions, be part of the discussion as we move throughout the show. Jump in there and join the rest of them. Of course, don't forget, you can follow me, twitter.com/LMM. Talk about some interesting things there. both on my daily job here at Microsoft and, of course, what I do outside of Microsoft. Of course, you can always check out dev.office.com. You get to check out all the latest and greatest things that the Office platform does for you to make you more productive on top of Office. I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support us each and every week to do this show, and we couldn't do the show without them. We also want to thank all the engineers at Twit. That we can't do this show without them. And of course, we want to thank our tireless producer as well and our co-host in crime, Mr. Brian Shee. He does all the bookings. He does all the plannings for the show, and we really couldn't do this show without him. Of course, before we sign out, we have to thank our TD for today. I think it's Jeff, right? Jeff, you have a camera on you?
No camera.
I have a microphone.
But have a microphone.
Oh, fantastic. Well, what was we have to do tradition, right? What was the main topic of today's show?
Well, shiny things are important. Curtis says, shiny things keep us employed.
Very good, very good. I would say close, but no cigar. I would say it's more of hacking cardboard, but maybe next time. Maybe next time. Thank you for playing the Twilight episode. But we appreciate you being here, and maybe next time we'll get you to come in and get it right. But until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.